I want to tell you about a real experience, something that still makes my skin crawl even years later. This isn't the kind of story you hear at a campfire and laugh about later. No, this is one of those stories that stay with you, that sink deep into your bones and make you rethink every shadow in the corner of your room. This story comes from a nurse in the United States. Let's call her Sarah. She worked in a large hospital that had been standing for more than 60 years. From the outside, it looked perfectly ordinary, another tall medical building with mirrored windows that reflected the morning sun. People came and went, doctors in white coats, families clutching flowers, ambulance sirens fading in the distance. By day, the hospital was alive, but when the sun went down, something changed. The corridors grew silent, too silent, and the same windows that glittered in daylight became black squares staring into nothing. Every fluorescent bulb seemed weaker, humming and flickering, like they were just barely clinging to life. Every nurse who worked the night shift knew there was one place you didn't go alone: the basement. Not because of some official rule, not because the hospital administration forbade it, but because the staff themselves had made it an unspoken law. The basement had become something of a legend, a whispered warning passed from one employee to another. Sarah heard about it on her very first day. A senior nurse with tired eyes and a grave expression leaned toward her and said quietly, "If you ever have to go down to the basement, don't ever go alone." At first, Sarah thought it was just hazing. Maybe the seniors liked to spook the rookies, a way to bond over fake ghost stories. But as weeks passed, she realized it wasn't a joke. Everyone, nurses, doctors, even security guards, had their own version of the same story. Some said they'd heard someone crying softly down there when no one was around. Others swore they'd seen shadows that didn't match their own movements. And then there were darker rumors, the ones people only hinted at but never said out loud. Stories about patients who were last seen being wheeled toward the basement, but who never appeared on the hospital records again. The basement itself had practical uses. It stored old medical records, dusty shelves of paperwork that hadn't yet been digitized. It held outdated equipment that nobody used anymore, but that hadn't been thrown away. And in one locked chamber, there was a small morgue, just a temporary holding place for bodies before they were moved to the larger forensic facility. The air was always damp, carrying a stale mixture of disinfectant, mold, and metal. The paint on the walls had peeled in jagged strips, revealing the concrete underneath. Sarah hated night shifts. She was naturally anxious in quiet places, and the stillness of a hospital after midnight always made her uneasy. When she'd applied for the job, she hoped for day shifts or evenings, but new nurses didn't get to choose. They filled the gaps, and that meant she was stuck working through the darkest hours, when most of the city was asleep and the hospital seemed more like a mausoleum than a place of healing. That night was like many others, long, quiet, draining. The clock crept toward midnight, and the halls were eerily silent, except for the beeping of monitors in the ICU. Beep, beep, beep. A cold reminder that life and death balanced on thin lines in this building. Sarah sat in the nurses' station, sipping cheap coffee from the vending machine. The bitter taste kept her awake, though her eyelids felt heavy. Across from her, another nurse, Linda, sat flipping through patient charts. Linda was older, seasoned, the type who'd seen too much to scare easily. Yet even she avoided speaking too loudly, as if sound itself might disturb something lurking in the walls. In a hushed voice, Linda said, "You know what tonight is, right? It's our turn to check the supply stock in the basement." She glanced at Sarah with a look that wasn't teasing, but almost apologetic. "Normally, I'd go with you, but I'm stuck watching a patient on the second floor. So if they ask for something from down there..." She paused, her expression darkening. "You'll have to get it." Sarah laughed nervously, trying to shrug it off. "I'll be fine. It's just a basement." But Linda didn't laugh. She leaned closer and whispered firmly, "I'm serious. Don't stay down there long, and if you hear something, don't follow it." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Sarah nodded quickly, pretending it didn't bother her, but deep inside, dread stirred. The hours crawled by. The wall clock ticked loudly, tick, 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 each second stretching forever. The hospital silence pressed against her ears. The occasional squeak of shoes on linoleum echoed unnaturally. The groan of old pipes or the soft slam of a distant door made her flinch. She tried to distract herself with paperwork, filling in patient logs, but her thoughts drifted again and again toward the basement. Her stomach knotted, though she had no reason, at least no logical reason, to feel afraid. Still, the unease grew heavier with every passing minute. At 1:15 a.m., the phone on the desk rang. The shrill sound cut through the silence like a knife. Sarah jumped and fumbled to pick it up. On the other end, a doctor's voice came through, calm but firm. "We need a specific piece of equipment. It should be in storage in the basement. Can you grab it?" Sarah froze, her throat dry. She wanted to refuse, to say she was busy, but she knew she couldn't. It was her job. Swallowing hard, she replied, "Yes, doctor, I'll get it right." Away. When she hung up, her hands trembled slightly. Linda looked at her, concern etched into her face. "Basement?" she asked quietly. Sarah nodded. Linda inhaled deeply, then said only 2 words, "Be careful." Sarah rose from her chair, straightened her uniform, and began the long walk toward the stairwell that led down. Each step echoed too loudly, as if the building itself wanted to remind her how alone she was. The stairwell door loomed ahead, a heavy metal barrier painted dull gray. She pulled it open, and the hinges screamed. The staircase stretched downward, swallowed in dim yellow light. The air was different here, colder, damper, and filled with the faint scent of mildew. The deeper she went, the more it felt like descending into another world, one that didn't belong to the bright, sterile hospital above. At the bottom, another door awaited. Its handle was icy against her palm, unnaturally cold compared to the air around it. She pushed it open. The basement corridor lay before her, a long, narrow tunnel lined with shelves and flickering fluorescent bulbs. The lights buzzed and blinked erratically, as though struggling to stay alive. The walls were streaked with stains, the paint blistering in places. The air was thick, heavy, almost suffocating. Sarah stepped inside. Her footsteps echoed, but the echoes didn't sound right. There was a delay, a faint second set of steps that didn't match her rhythm, trailing half a beat behind. She froze. Her breath caught. She turned her head quickly. No one was there. The corridor stretched empty. Behind her, silent. She forced herself to move forward, telling herself it was just the acoustics, just the way sound bounced in old buildings. Still, her skin prickled. Her heart thudded in her chest. On the shelves, cardboard boxes sagged with age, some gnawed by rats. Folders thick with dust leaned haphazardly, forgotten. The morgue door sat at the far end, sealed with a padlock, but even at a distance, its presence felt heavy. She found the supply box she needed and lifted it into her arms. The weight steadied her for a moment, something tangible, something real. She turned, ready to leave. That was when she heard it, a voice, barely audible, barely human. A whisper carried on stale air. "Sarah?" Her blood turned to ice. She gasped, spinning in every direction. But the corridor was empty. She didn't even question how it knew her name. Her brain refused to process it. Her only instinct was to get out. The fluorescent lights flickered violently, buzzing louder. She clutched the box tighter and began walking quickly, then faster, toward the stairs. Her footsteps pounded, and yet there it was again. Another set of footsteps just behind her, matching her pace. Her breath came fast and shallow. Then from the far end of the hall, bang! Sarah screamed. The box nearly slipped from her grip as she bolted for the stairwell. She tore the door open, stumbled up the stairs, heart hammering so loud it drowned everything else. She didn't stop until she burst back onto the main floor, slamming the basement door shut behind her. Her hands shook uncontrollably, sweat trickled down her forehead. Her chest heaved as she leaned against the wall, fighting for breath. In that moment, one truth settled in her mind with chilling certainty. The stories about the basement weren't just rumors, they were warnings. And she had barely escaped learning why. After that night, Sarah couldn't sleep peacefully anymore. Even when she tried to convince herself that everything she experienced in the basement was just her imagination, a part of her kept whispering that what she saw and heard was real. That night, after slamming the basement door shut and leaning against it, breathless and trembling, her legs shook so badly she almost couldn't stand. Linda, the senior nurse who had warned her before, came rushing toward her with a pale face. "You went down there alone, didn't you?" she asked, her voice a mix of anger and worry. Sarah could only nod, still struggling to catch her breath. Linda let out a long sigh, then gently patted her shoulder. "I told you not to stay down. They're too long." "Did you hear something?" Sarah hesitated. How could she explain about the whisper calling her name from the darkness, the footsteps mimicking her own, or the slamming door echoing from the far end of the corridor? If she told the truth, Linda might think she was hallucinating or letting her fear get the best of her. So instead, Sarah answered quietly, I only heard a door slam, but I didn't see anyone." Linda stared into her eyes for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Then you've felt it. Don't ever take the warnings from the older staff lightly." Those words carved themselves deep into Sarah's mind. For the rest of that night, she buried herself in her work, doing everything she could to avoid thinking about the basement. But each time she passed the corridor that led to the stairwell, her skin prickled. It was as if something behind that steel door was waiting for her, waiting patiently for another chance to appear. In the days that followed, Sarah avoided any task that might require her to go downstairs. But as a new nurse, she couldn't say no forever. A few weeks later, another request came. A doctor asked her to fetch an old medication stored in the basement since the stock upstairs had run out. It was nearly 3 a.m. The hospital was at its quietest. Most patients were asleep. Monitors beeped softly in their rooms, and only one or two doctors sat at the reception desk, their heads buried in paperwork. Sarah clutched a small note listing the medicines she needed. Each step toward the basement staircase felt heavier than the last. When she pulled the door open, the familiar damp odor hit her nose instantly. The same flickering lights buzzed overhead, struggling to stay lit. Sarah swallowed hard, turned on the flashlight on her phone, and started down slowly. Her footsteps echoed against the concrete walls. This time, she was more alert. She listened carefully, waiting for any sound that didn't belong. Each time the echoes bounced strangely, she stopped, holding her breath, straining to tell whether it was just her imagination or something else. When she finally reached the shelves where the old bottles were stored, a sudden click echoed. From above, one of the fluorescent bulbs at the far end of the corridor went dark, leaving half the basement in shadow. Sarah's hand shook slightly as she raised the light from her phone higher. Then she heard it. Not footsteps, not whispers. Something worse, the sound of someone crying, soft, muffled sobs coming from behind the morgue door that was locked shut. At the far end of the hallway, Sarah froze. Her whole body stiffened as if nailed to the floor. Her brain screamed at her to run, but her legs wouldn't obey. The crying continued, low and broken, the sound of someone in terrible pain. Without realizing it, Sarah began to move toward the morgue door. Every step felt wrong, felt dangerous, but curiosity gnawed at her, more than fear. She stopped just a few feet away, the crying still seeping through the cracks in the metal. Then, suddenly, it stopped. Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. so complete she could hear the pounding of her own heart. She pressed her ear against the cold steel, desperate to know if she'd imagined it. And then, right there, inches from her ear, a different voice whispered, low, raspy, too close. "Word Monner open." It, Sarah screamed and stumbled backward, nearly tripping over her own feet. The list of medicines fell from her hand, papers scattering across the floor. Her breathing turned frantic, shallow and rapid, as tears welled up in her eyes. She ran, she sprinted down the hallway, shoes pounding against the floor, her flashlight shaking wildly. Halfway to the stairs, she risked one glance back, and she saw it, a shadow, tall, darker than the darkness itself, standing motionless in front of the morgue door, its head tilted slightly to the side, as if watching her. Sarah shrieked and slammed into the stairwell door with her shoulder, shoving it open so hard it hit the wall. She climbed the stairs frantically, almost slipping, her legs burning with panic. At the top, she burst into the corridor and slammed the door shut behind her. This time, she turned the lock, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She could barely breathe, her chest rising and falling in ragged gasps. At that moment, Linda appeared, rushing toward her. She grabbed Sarah's shoulders, steadying her. "What did you see?" she demanded. Sarah's voice broke as she sobbed. "There was something down there. It told me to open the door." Linda's face fell. She looked down slowly, shaking her head. "And that's why none of us ever work alone down there, because something in that basement is always waiting for someone to open the door." Sarah never forgot that night. Even years later, whenever she worked a night shift, her eyes would avoid the hallway that led to the basement stairs. And every time she thought she heard faint noises in the empty corridors, she remembered one terrifying truth. The basement still held something far worse than just an empty room. Since that night, Sarah carried the weight of trauma like a shadow that refused to leave. Every time she walked past the corridor leading to the basement door, her body tensed. Even if she was just passing by, her heart pounded violently, as if something was lurking just behind that iron door, waiting for her. Linda and the other senior nurses tried to comfort her, telling her that everyone who had stepped into the basement had experienced something strange. But the way they said it only confirmed what Sarah already feared. What she had faced was far more than strange. It was real. Something down there was aware of her presence, something that called her by name. She forced herself to remain professional. She couldn't refuse every task just because of her personal fear. Still, the memory of the weeping voice, the whisper that commanded, "Open it," and that towering shadow in the corridor haunted her every moment. Even in sleep, she woke from nightmares where she stood alone in the basement, surrounded by darkness, footsteps approaching closer and closer. 1 week later, during another night shift, the atmosphere felt heavier than usual. Outside, rain poured down in relentless sheets, and thunder cracked violently, rattling the hospital windows. Around 1 a.m., a doctor rushed to Sarah in panic. A critical patient needed an emergency blood transfusion, and the only available supply was stored in a small freezer down in the basement. Sarah's face turned pale. The doctor's voice was sharp, urgent. "Quickly, get it! We don't have time. A life depends on this." Her throat went dry. She wanted to refuse, but this wasn't about her fear anymore. It was about saving a life. With trembling hands, she nodded and ran toward the basement stairwell. As soon as she opened the iron door, that familiar damp, icy air seeped out, wrapping around her like invisible hands. The fluorescent lights above flickered weakly, as if straining to stay alive. Sarah whispered to herself, "Just grab the blood and leave. Don't listen. Don't look back." Her footsteps echoed as she walked quickly down the corridor. Dust-covered shelves stretched along the walls, fading into the shadows. When she passed the morgue door, her entire body tensed. She lowered her head, refusing to glance at it. But then, the sound came. Not crying, not a whisper. Knock, knock, knock. Her teeth clenched. She forced herself not to run. She pushed forward, faster now, until she reached the freezer at the end of the hall. Her hand shook violently as she opened it, grabbed a bag of blood, and slammed the door shut. Then she turned around. Her breath froze in her throat. The corridor wasn't empty anymore. A figure was standing there, tall and skeletal, its outline shimmering in the flickering neon light above. The lamp buzzed and blinked erratically, as if struggling against its very presence. The figure didn't move. It stood motionless, its head tilted downward, yet Sarah felt its gaze piercing straight into her chest, cold, suffocating, merciless. With a desperate burst of adrenaline, Sarah threw herself to the side and sprinted toward the stairs. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears as she ran. Behind her, she heard it, those heavy, deliberate footsteps. They weren't rushed. They didn't need to be. Whatever it was, it knew she couldn't escape forever. Sarah reached the stairwell, shoved the door open, and stumbled upward, nearly falling as she slammed it shut behind her. She pressed her back to the wall, panting wildly, clutching the blood bag so tightly her knuckles turned white. When she finally staggered into the emergency room and handed the blood to the doctor, no one knew what had just happened. To them, she had simply done her job. But deep down, Sarah knew she had narrowly escaped something that was no longer just a nightmare. Later that night, when things calmed down, she told Linda everything. Linda listened quietly, her expression grave. After a long silence, she said softly, "You know, before you came here, there was another nurse. She was found dead in the basement. They said she had gone alone to retrieve supplies. Her body was discovered right in front of the morgue door, her face frozen in absolute terror, as if she had seen something unspeakable." Sarah felt her stomach twist. Her whole body trembled. The puzzle pieces fell into place, the cries, the whisper, the shadow. Maybe it was all connected to that nurse who never came back. Linda's voice lowered, almost breaking. "Since then, we've had an unspoken rule. No one goes to the basement alone, no matter the reason." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she bowed her head. She knew one thing for certain: the longer she stayed in that hospital, the greater the chance she would face the entity again. And maybe next time, it wouldn't let her leave alive. Since the night Sarah nearly lost her life in the basement, the hospital no longer felt the same. There were no normal night shifts anymore. Every dark hallway, every flicker of shadow, every unfamiliar sound now tightened her chest with dread. But the one thing that haunted her most was the sound of those heavy footsteps. All was echoing behind her. 1 week later, an IT technician arrived at the nurse station carrying a laptop. His face was pale, serious. He explained that security had flagged unusual activity on the basement CCTV. Normally, nobody ever bothered. Reviewing that footage, the basement was almost always deserted at night. But after the emergency last week, they decided to take another look. Sarah, who had been writing reports, froze. Her fingers trembled. A heavy pit formed in her stomach. She knew this footage would not show anything normal. The technician clicked the file open. The screen displayed the dim corridor of the basement, the faint light of flickering fluorescent bulbs. Sarah recognized it instantly. Her heartbeat pounded harder with every passing second. On the screen, there she was, walking quickly towards the freezer, holding her small flashlight, her face tense. Everything looked ordinary, until it didn't. Only seconds later, something appeared that drained the air out of the room. At the far end of the corridor, just behind Sarah, a shadow stretched unnaturally long across the floor. It wasn't from the lamps, it wasn't a reflection, it was too tall, too large. The silhouette of a human-like figure, but with a grotesquely elongated head. And the worst part, this shadow moved on its own. When Sarah in the video turned her head, the shadow froze. But when she stepped forward, the shadow slid forward with her, following slowly, deliberately. Sarah covered her mouth, stifling a scream. Her face went white. Linda reached out, grabbing her hand for comfort, though Linda's own face betrayed her fear. The technician pressed play again. When the moment came where Sarah grabbed the blood bag, The camera flickered. For just a fraction of a second, Aichi single frame appeared, clear enough to freeze everyone's breath. It wasn't a shadow anymore. The figure was tall, skeletal, its skin blackened, as if burned. Its body loomed behind Sarah, towering over her, and where its eyes should have been were only two hollow pits of endless darkness. And worst of all, it was leaning forward. Just a few steps away from her, Sarah staggered back from the screen, tears streaming down her face. She had never felt so powerless. In the video, she could be seen sprinting toward the stairwell while the figure simply stood there, its head tilting, watching her leave. And then the camera glitched again. This time, something pressed against the lens itself, two pale, bony hands clawing at the camera as if reaching through it. The footage broke into static and noise. The technician stopped the video, his face pale with disbelief. I can't explain this. No one else accessed the basement that night. The door logs confirm it was only you, Sarah. The room fell into suffocating silence. No one dared to speak. Finally, Linda whispered, her voice trembling. This isn't the first time. The basement CCTV has glitched before, but never this clearly. Sarah felt her body grow heavy. The thought consumed her. If that thing was only a few steps away, in reality, it could have touched her. It could have dragged her away. And yet, it didn't. It only watched. It was waiting. From that day on, hospital management declared a new rule. No staff member was to enter the basement alone. Even if it was necessary, at least two people had to go together, and they were required to stay in radio contact. But for Sarah, that rule wasn't enough. Because no matter how many people surrounded her, she never truly felt safe. In her dreams, she was always alone. And in those dreams, the figure always appeared, standing at the end of the corridor, calling to her in that rasping voice, "Open." Her nights became unbearable. Sleep evaded her, replaced by the same nightmare over and over. Even during the day, she sometimes heard faint footsteps behind her as she walked the halls. But whenever she turned around, nothing was there. And then it escalated. One evening, while Sarah was working at the nurse station, one of the CCTV monitors suddenly glitched. The screen shifted on its own, cutting straight to the basement feed. Everyone turned. The footage showed the morgue door. Slowly, impossibly, it creaked open, though it was supposed to be locked tight. A thin mist rolled out from within, crawling across the corridor floor. And then a massive shadow emerged from the darkness inside. For the first time, the entity lifted its head and stared directly into the camera. Sarah screamed, covering her face with her hands. She knew then that this was no longer confined to the basement. Whatever lived down there wasn't just waiting anymore, it was showing itself. It wanted to be seen. Ever since the CCTV footage spread among the staff, the hospital had never felt the same. Everyone knew something was wrong with the basement. And yet, strangely, the management tried to bury it. They didn't want patients or the public to know. They said it was for the sake of reputation, but Sarah couldn't stay silent anymore. The nightmares had gone on long enough. Every single night, the same voice woke her up whispering, "Open it." And every time she came to work, that basement door seemed to be waiting for her, calling her. One night, Linda spoke in a hushed, trembling voice. "Sarah, maybe you've realized by now that thing down there, it's not just a ghost. There's an old story people whisper about this hospital. Decades ago, when it first opened, there was a doctor who carried out forbidden experiments in the basement. Patients died. Their bodies were never found. Some say their souls are still trapped down there." Sarah's skin crawled. The pieces began to fit together. The cries, the whispers, the towering shadow. Maybe it wasn't one spirit. Maybe it was many, fused together in that suffocating darkness. That night was her final shift. Sarah had already decided she was leaving this place for good. But before she walked away forever, she needed to know, were all her fears real? or just her imagination. At 2 a.m., rain hammered against the city. The hospital was eerily quiet, the halls empty. With only her small flashlight in hand, Sarah stood before the basement door. Her hands shook, cold sweat dripping down her back, but her mind was set. She slowly pushed the door open. The hinges screamed into the silence. The damp, suffocating smell hit her instantly. The stairwell yawned into the dark. Each step down pounded, with her heartbeat. Her shoes tapped against the concrete floor, the sound bouncing back unnaturally, as if someone else was walking with her. At the bottom, the hallway stretched out, lit only by flickering neon, and in the center, the morgue door stood slightly ajar, just like in the CCTV footage. Sarah swallowed hard, and then she heard it, the voice again. This time, not faint, not distant, clear, close, right at her ear. "Open it," her trembling hand reached for the handle, as though something unseen was pulling her forward. The air grew colder, her breath fogging in the dim light. The moment her fingers touched the handle, every single light went out, pitch black. Behind her, footsteps echoed, slow, heavy, relentless. She couldn't move. Her body froze in place, paralyzed by something she couldn't see. Then, without warning, the morgue door slammed open. A thick white fog poured into the hallway, swallowing her in cold mist. And out of that haze, the figure appeared. It was taller than ever, skeletal, its head brushing the ceiling, its face nothing but two hollow pits of darkness. And from its body, 1,000 voices screamed in unison. Men, women, children, all trapped in one endless cry. Sarah broke free of her paralysis. She ran. She ran harder than she ever had before, flashlight trembling in her grip. Her breath ripped. Out of her chest, heart pounding violently, she dared one glance back. The creature followed. Its strides were long, impossibly fast. It didn't run. It glided, closing the gap with every moment. Sarah tore up the stairs, slamming into the basement door. She shoved it shut, just as a pale, bony hand reached through the gap. With a desperate cry, she forced it closed, locked it, and collapsed onto the floor, sobbing, shaking uncontrollably. The figure was gone, but from the other side of the door, through the iron and wood, she heard the faintest whisper, "This isn't over." Sarah never returned to the hospital. The very next morning, she resigned, packed her things, and moved to another city. But the basement never left her. Even now, when she dreams, she finds herself back there, standing in the endless corridor, with footsteps approaching, and sometimes, when she wakes in the dead of night, she swears she feels it, something standing in the corner of her room, watching, waiting, as if the basement had finally followed her home. Ever since the CCTV footage spread among the staff, the hospital had never felt the same. Everyone knew something was wrong with the basement. And yet, strangely, the management tried to bury it. They didn't want patients or the public to know. They said it was for the sake of reputation, but Sarah couldn't stay silent anymore. The nightmares had gone on long enough. Every single night, the same voice woke her up, whispering, "Open it." And every time she came to work, that basement door seemed to be waiting for her, calling her. One night, Linda spoke in a hushed, trembling voice. "Sarah? Maybe you've realized by now, that thing down there, it's not just a ghost. There's an old story people whisper about this hospital. Decades ago, when it first opened, there was a doctor who carried out forbidden experiments in the basement. Patients died. Their bodies were never found. Some say their souls are still trapped down there." Sarah's skin crawled. The pieces began to fit together. The cries, the whispers, the towering shadow. Maybe it wasn't one spirit, maybe it was many, fused together in that suffocating darkness. That night was her final shift. Sarah had already decided she was leaving this place for good. But before she walked away forever, she needed to know, were all her fears real, or just her imagination? At 2 a.m., rain hammered against the city. The hospital was eerily quiet, the halls empty. With only her small flashlight in hand, Sarah stood before the basement door. Her hands shook, cold sweat dripping down her back, but her mind was set. She slowly pushed the door open. The hinges screamed into the silence. The damp, suffocating smell hit her instantly. The stairwell yawned into the dark. Each step down pounded, with her heartbeat. Her shoes tapped against the concrete floor, the sound bouncing back unnaturally, as if someone else was walking with her. At the bottom, the hallway stretched out, lit only by flickering neon, and in the center, the morgue door stood slightly ajar, just like in the CCTV footage. Sarah swallowed hard, and then she heard it, the voice again. This time, not faint, not distant, clear, close, right at her ear. "Open it," her trembling. Hand reached for the handle, as though something unseen was pulling her forward. The air grew colder, her breath fogging in the dim light. The moment her fingers touched the handle, every single light went out, pitch black. Behind her, footsteps echoed, slow, heavy, relentless. She couldn't move. Her body froze in place, paralyzed by something she couldn't see. Then, without warning, the morgue door slammed open. A thick white fog poured into the hallway, swallowing her in cold mist. And out of that haze, the figure appeared. It was taller than ever, skeletal, its head brushing the ceiling, its face nothing but two hollow pits of darkness. And from its body, 1,000 voices screamed in unison, men, women, children, all trapped in one endless cry. Sarah broke free of her paralysis. She ran harder than she ever had before, flashlight trembling in her grip. Her breath ripped out of her chest, heart pounding violently. She dared one glance back. The creature followed. Its strides were long, impossibly fast. It didn't run, it glided, closing the gap with every moment. Sarah tore up the stairs, slamming into the basement door. She shoved it shut just as a pale, bony hand reached through the gap. With a desperate cry, she forced it closed, locked it, and collapsed onto the floor, sobbing, shaking uncontrollably. The figure was gone. But from the other side of the door, through the iron and wood, she heard the faintest whisper, "This isn't over." Sarah never returned to the hospital. The very next morning, she resigned, packed her things, and moved to another city, but the basement never left her. Even now, when she dreams, she finds herself back there, standing in the endless corridor with footsteps approaching. And sometimes, when she wakes in the dead of night, she swears she feels it, something standing in the corner of her room, watching, waiting, as if the basement had finally followed her home.